All right, welcome in. It's Tuesday. It is now August 19th, 2025. We got a lot to talk about tonight, and it's not so much our local weather here in the Charlotte area, Western Carolinas. We'll probably save some to talk with Tim, but we've got our first hurricane of the season, which I feel like we've been tracking forever. It has been 2 weeks almost since it's formed off the coast of Africa, but now it is threatening some impacts here in the Carolinas. And I will emphasize this, we are not expecting a landfall. I had someone even on social media today ask me, I heard it was coming ashore and people were evacuating, close to us. And I was like, there's only people evacuating Outer Banks right now. It is not going to make a direct hit. It's the indirect impacts and some direct impacts of it staying offshore, which we'll get into. But let's focus locally because it was a really nice day after the clouds have got out here. Boy, those clouds were pesky today. They lingered for most of the afternoon, but as you can see from our Mr. Sparky camera network, we're starting to see wall-to-wall sunshine develop out there. And it is nice to see the sunshine return because it was so gray for most of the day. But it did help keep the temperatures down. That's always the nice benefit of having clouds in the summer. It's kind of gray, but it keeps the temperature down. And we didn't have rain today. So once again, we saw dry conditions. This has been the driest stretch we've had all month, really, the last week. Sure, we've seen an isolated storm here and there, but nothing like the first two weeks of the month. Tonight, I'm going to show you temperatures first before we get to the overnight temperatures, just to show you where we are so you got some perspective on how cool it will be tonight. So you can see we're in the low to mid 80s. In fact, that's some of the warmest air of the day so far. And as we go into tonight, we will see those temperatures eventually cool back down into I'd say upper 60s, low 70s, so about 70. That's a little bit above normal. Normal low is about 68 now, which we'll talk a lot about as well. Our normals are starting to go down, 68 and 88 now. So we are definitely on the downhill side of summer. Tomorrow, temperatures heat back up. We're going to be back up around 90 because I expect sun most of the day. So temperatures around 90, just a small chance of an isolated storm. So when we look at the futurecast here, you'll see no rain really tonight, just some clouds and maybe some mist or drizzle in the morning. We saw some of that fog this morning. Tomorrow, mostly sunny until about right there. By this time tomorrow, we might be tracking a few showers and storms on the radar. And as we go into Thursday, looks mostly dry except for an isolated shower storm. So you kind of get the idea. There's no crazy widespread showers and storms. This is going to be the isolated stuff. So then we start getting into Aaron, and we'll talk a lot about Aaron coming up. I'm going to ask Tim a lot about some of his thoughts today because for a while the storm was really ragged. It weakened quite a bit, and you can somewhat see that on our imagery here. I'm going to move it up. The west side of the storm was just battered by wind shear and dry air. You can see on the west side of the storm, there's barely any clouds and not much shower activity. The center is right here, and at one point it was fully exposed. So it was being blown to the southeast by some high winds, and then the dry air. You see the dry air. All that yellow you see on the map, that's really dry air in the mid and upper levels, and you can see it got pulled into the middle. So the circulation is trying to reorganize around the center, but it's a lopsided storm. There's more clouds and showers on the east side, and the winds are stronger there, but the whole storm itself is actually getting pretty big. The wind field is expanding quite a bit, so we're still seeing those strong winds west of the center. The 5 o'clock advisory, 105 mile per hour winds. Now we're waiting for the hurricane hunters to get out there. They are on their way for the evening mission. We'll actually, I'm kind of keeping a close eye on the mission. I'm trying to see where they are right now, but they're beginning to head out there, and we'll have a better idea. Yeah, they just left and from St. Croix, and they're heading up to the system right now. So maybe during the show here in a little bit, we'll talk about some of the readings they're starting to get. But the track has been very unchanged. It's offshore. I mean, the center of circulation is going to pass probably about 200 miles plus offshore. Problem is the tropical storm force winds are going out about 200 miles from the center. So that's going to clip the Outer Banks and parts of western North Carolina. And also look at Bermuda under a tropical storm watch. So that should give you a good indication of how wide this system is. We've got tropical storm watches west of the center and then all the way to Bermuda. Just so you know, the distance between the Outer Banks and Bermuda is just over 650 miles. So we're expecting impacts over a pretty large area. Now, definitely more on the right side or the east side than the west side, but it's close enough. And the Outer Banks stick out there, so they're always very susceptible. We talked about this last week with Tim. The Outer Banks are just very vulnerable. Even today at high tide, there was overwash on the highway there. And it's, 2 days before the storm really impacts them. So that should give you an idea of how vulnerable they are. So we've got the storm surge warnings, and we do have tropical storm warnings for eastern North Carolina. So this will really tell you how wide the storm is, that the fact that we have tropical storm warnings and storm surge warnings, even with that far distance. The winds, I'll show you again the storm surge warning, which, by the way, the water is our number one concern. So here's a look at the winds. The probabilities of tropical storm force winds have actually gone down a little because of the lopsided nature of this. So 25, 30%. I mean, we're going to see tropical storm force winds, which are only 39 miles per hour, but the winds probably are not going to be the biggest story. These are the gusts, by the way, not sustained. The gust at Hatteras peaks somewhere in the mid-50s. And you're probably saying, wow, that's really windy. But if you've been to the Outer Banks, that's really not that crazy. Every nor'easter, coastal low, even in the summer, the wind's pretty much blowing 30, 35 on any given day. That's why it's a really windy, dune-laden, and very good surfing location here in the Carolinas, because they tend to have a lot of wind out there. So the winds actually aren't all that bad by Outer Banks standards, but the water is going to be the issue, and this is the big story. You see the storm surge potential, 3 to 6 feet in the Outer Banks. Remember, most of the Outer Banks, except for the dunes and the high points like a Kitty Hawk and some of those higher areas, it's only like a foot or two above sea level. So 3 to 6 feet is pretty significant. That's overwash for most of the island, and that will definitely wash out Highway 12. Now, the rip currents, boy, man, there's been so many rescues this week. I think at one point we had, over the weekend, like 300 or 400, and then yesterday there was another 200 in just Wrightsville Beach. So stay out of the water, please. It's just way too dangerous to be out there. So here's a look at our future casts, and we'll talk about this with Tim as well. It stays offshore. It may not even rain a drop in the Outer Banks. That shows you how far east that storm could be. But it will be windy, and it'll be one of those sunny, like flooding days. We have a lot of these sunny day floods now with high tides and king tides. This will be one of those days where there'll be overwash and likely flooding, even with sunshine and really windy conditions. So we'll talk with Tim more about that, and there's a lot to break down there. We'll show you some cameras from out there as well. But locally, no impact. So if you're in western and central Carolinas and even eastern North Carolina, you'd be hard-pressed to know the storm is even out there. Maybe the biggest impact we're going to see is on the backside. It's going to help pull down some cooler air, and we could see temperatures next week very pleasant, low 80s, upper 70s, morning lows maybe down into the 50s. So kind of some crisp, cool air, kind of people like to call it a false fall, but this is pretty typical at the end of August. Every year we tend to see some of the first cold fronts make a run at us. They don't last forever. It's not going to be sustained. That's why it's called false fall. It's usually going to be a brief shot, but it's the first of several cold fronts, and each front that comes down going into September and eventually October gets cooler and cooler as we transition. Remember, autumn's a transition season, so it's a little bit of summer and a little bit of winter. It takes a long time for it to be fully into winter. So that's a quick look at your forecast. Tim Buckley's going to join me back from WFMY. And Tim, we've got a lot to talk about, obviously, with Aaron out there. Aaron did a lot of weird things today for a while. It didn't look much like a healthy hurricane, and then tonight it looks like it's trying to get its act back together.
Yeah, Brad, good to see you. It does seem like, that's been the trend earlier today at weekend. And I was just kind of noticing myself over the last couple of hours, it's really started to reorganize a little bit, getting a bit more symmetric, I think, around that eye. There's not really a good eye anymore, but it's trying to maybe reform and just kind of build back up. And, for those watching, this is something we see with strong hurricanes. Sometimes they get too strong for their own good and they kind of lose a little bit of that steam and have to reorganize. That happened a few days ago. But today it was really under attack, wasn't it?
Yeah, the dry air and shear was really beating it up, and for a while there, the center was exposed. It was just not a healthy looking tropical system at all. And what's interesting about these systems, when they get bigger like they are, and we're seeing this with Aaron, it can produce a lot more storm surge. The wind field gets a lot bigger, but it also has a lot fewer fluctuations in intensity. The reason we saw that rapid intensification over the weekend, Tim, that thing was tiny. The center was really small, and it was able to wrap up quickly and scale up. When they get broad and big like this, they're not as maneuverable. They tend to not have wild swings, but that's part of the problem for the Outer Banks. And I don't know, Jeb, if you can take our my laptop camera from Surf Check here. But Tim, today we already starting to see some pretty good swells and some waves out there. And I've been really impressed with this swell that has been moving towards all of the coast. I mean, I saw some beach erosion even down at Folly Beach, Myrtle Beach area, Cherry Grove area, Topsail Island saw some erosion today. And to think that this storm is still like 2 days away from these areas.
It's concerning, and you could look at this and just ooh and ah. It's a gorgeous scene. I mean,
Yes.
talk about a beautiful thing to look at, and this is why we have to tell people to stay out of the water.
Yeah.
I was down there this weekend. I left Monday morning. It was one of the best beach conditions of the summertime. So you want to go in, but you need to know that danger is really there underneath the water. Those rip currents have been visual. You've been able to see some of them if you have a trained eye. But if you don't, I mean, that's why they're telling you just to stay out of the water all week long. There's nothing safe about it. And it's tempting because the weather is so nice. Rip currents aren't dangerous when it's raining outside because no one wants to go swimming. But when it's sunny, they sure are more dangerous because it's that temptation that people want to get in there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the surf and boogie board crowd is just salivating at those waves and probably making them want to get in the water and pick up some of that surf. But as you mentioned, the amount of water coming in, and this is the thing I think it's always interesting about rip currents, because I had a really good question today from someone off camera, said, why do waves produce rip currents? And I really trying to simplify that all that water coming ashore has to go back out to the ocean at some point. And so the more water you push towards the coast, it has to go back out. And so those rip currents become stronger as you push more current towards the coast. So if you think about the waves or the surface water coming ashore, underneath is the water going back out to the ocean. That's the rip current.
That's right. And I think even as much education as we do about these every year, I still think there's a big chunk of people that misunderstand what a rip current is. It's the water going out that pulls you out. It's not that current that pushes you along the coast. That's different. That's a longshore current, which can have some danger too. But if that thing's sucking you right out into the ocean, that's what tires you out. That's what you can't really fight that well against. And that's what makes the rip currents dangerous, because that water, like you said, has to go back out.
Yeah, so another thing that happened today, Tim, I always hate to say this, because when you watch these like as much as we do, I feel like we overanalyze every wobble. Like, oh, it's going west, it's going east, but there was a little bit, I think, because of the organization of the center, it did look like it shifted a little bit east today as the center reformed. And tonight I'm looking at the wide views, and it looks to me like it's moving more north than northwest now, which maybe is a good sign, because there was always that thing, and we talked about it last week, like we were 99.9% sure it wasn't going to make landfall. But you always had that little 0.1% that you're worried about. So for us, we're like, man, that it's moving due north or even wobbling a little bit east is a sign that, okay, we're breathing a little bit better, that yes, it's going to stay offshore. But there's still the question, Tim, of how far offshore that is going to be.
Yeah, that's right. I'll pop my graphics up here just to kind of illustrate the point that you said. Last night, I was still a little bit nervous because it seemed like it was stalling somewhat, kind of edging west, like we said. You kind of have to force yourself to look at it on a longer view.
Yes.
So instead of a little 3-hour loop or something, I put on an 18-hour loop here of the storm. And if you watch it, this is all at the same speed every hour, but it kind of looks like it slows down and speeds up. It's changing, and it really is kind of pulsing that movement a little bit. It had a bit of a slowdown yesterday. Now, not only is it moving more northerly, it's also moving a tick faster. It was going at 8 miles per hour. Now it's going at 10 miles per hour. That might not sound like that much, but that's 20% faster than it was before. So that's something that we can take to the bank. And, if you kind of extrapolate that motion, it's basically going like this already, and then we just need it to go like that. So we know that's going to happen. It's going to be still a little stressful until you see it, but it's really nice to see that curve is already starting to happen. What you can also see, which is the point that you were making earlier, you can see it start to grow in winds or in size. It's getting bigger as a storm, and this graphic is one that we like to show once we get a little bit closer. The wind field kind of expanding and getting a little bit bigger. So as you get up toward where the Outer Banks are located, how wide is that wind field? Well, from one side to the other, could we have a 500-mile wide tropical storm force wind?
Yeah.
It's possible. That's the forecast right now. So that's kind of the impressive thing. And I'm not sure what your thoughts are on peak winds or anything over there by Cape Hatteras, but it seems like 50, 60 gusts aren't really out of the question.
Yeah.
Maybe on the high side, but still something we'll want to watch for.
Yeah, I think that's. I think I mentioned in my local forecast that if you're not from the Outer Banks or spend time out there, it's windy. It's pretty much windy all the time.
Yes.
So a wind like that might seem pretty high for us, and it is. But for them, it's kind of run of the mill for most of the coastal lows and storms they see. The bigger concern really is the water, right? It's not going to be the wind; it's the water. And we're messaging back and forth, and I'm glad you were able to put this together. But you have a great image there of all the Highway 12 cameras from the Outer Banks, and we saw at high tide today, which by the way happened at 4:00. We saw some overwash at 4:00, Tim, and that's when that coincided with the first overwash going on out there. But what's always fascinating about these images and really tells you how vulnerable they are, look how close the ocean is to that water. I mean, it's basically on the beach, and that berm or that dune, that's not natural, that's man-made. They put that there for a purpose to try to block the waves, and it's a constant battle out there, Tim.
It really is, and this is something that kind of makes North Carolina unique. Folks around the country see something like this. They've probably never seen this before. Highway 12 is a very unusual highway for exactly the reasons that you just said. We've got to build those artificial dunes to act as some sort of protection. It's not going to work, I don't think, over the next couple of days to keep that ocean at bay. What they're doing now is they're trying to give people more time to evacuate.
Yep.
And encouraging residents to leave is tough. A lot of them will choose to stay. They've done this before. But if you're choosing to stay, you need to be ready to be there, not just for a day or two, but maybe for several days. I mean, maybe a week or two, because it could take a while if this thing washes out. You could see that this is, takes a big repair that isn't always done quickly.
Yeah, that's always the tough thing about out there, because that berm helps them temporarily, but then all that sand has to be moved off the road, and that becomes really problematic. I mean, look how tall that is, and look at the waves already. So this is 645, in Tim's graphic there on Highway 12. But you see the water, it's already washed over. That's why there's sand on the road in a few spots. And the high tide today, I'm looking at the actual tide cycle. I'm going to look at Hatteras here. The high tide actually happened around 4:30, 5 o'clock. So they're still in that high tide cycle. The next one is actually going to be tomorrow morning at around 6 a.m. So we'll see tomorrow, because the water is likely going to be higher as the water comes in. And that's Buxton right there. So we saw the waves coming in there as well, and that was some significant overwash there, but I think that's on purpose. It looks like they cut a little pass there to let the water kind of flow across the road.
Yeah, and it's really, these local impacts, this is something that the people there know, the trouble spots, which places go first. I think that Buxton one is one of those spots that tends to be one of the first to go, and the writing's on the wall at this point. It's only going to get worse heading into tomorrow. Really, Thursday, the storm did slow down a little bit. Initially, it looked like Wednesday would probably be the closest approach. Now it's definitely Thursday.
Thursday morning, yeah.
So it's going to be a big issue. It's going to be a big issue.
So let me take the viewers into this, Jeb. If you can bring up my laptop here, there's a great product that the National Weather Service has that shows the peak, storm surge or tide level. So I'm going to start a little further south, and we're going to go to the Wilmington area, and you could see off to the left there. You could see some of the minor flooding that they expect already. They have some ongoing, but I'm going to go up to the Hatteras area. So this is right around the Coast Guard station in Hatteras. You could see they are forecasting, it looks like Thursday afternoon, Tim, around 6 p.m., a level of, it looks like, I think 3.4 feet, which is almost on the borderline of moderate. But what I find really interesting about this is some of the worst flooding forecasts, at least, is up in the northern Outer Banks. Duck up there has almost a record water level of 7.3 feet. The record is 7.8. And then you go around areas around the mouth of the Chesapeake and there's some levels there that could be around 5.8 or 6 feet, which would be close to record. So they are forecasting major coastal flooding in the northern Outer Banks and into like the Tidewater region of Virginia. And part of the reason, I'm glad you're illustrating this, you guys can't see this, but Jeb, punch up his graphics, because he's exactly telling us why that area is so susceptible. You see where that flow is, and look at the shape of the coast there, Tim. Anytime you see a concave shape like that, and the wind's pushing like that, that water just gets pushed into that area around Norfolk and the northern Outer Banks, and that water can't get out of there.
And really, like you said, it's all about angles. And so this, like, it sounds counterintuitive because they don't stick out as much as Cape Hatteras does. But this is they call it a longshore flow, or one of the persistent flow of water for several days. So we can even back this up. It's already in that same wind direction, hitting those northern Outer Banks, and it's just going to add up and add up and add up. And the angle of approach is really important in weather. The angle of approach with Helene in the North Carolina mountains is what made the rain really bad, because it hit the elevation at just the wrong spot. It forced the air to go up. Well, in this case, the water hitting the coastline where it sticks out so much, it's going to cause it to pile up more and more. Down by Hatteras, it might be able to flow right by them a little bit, at least on the southeast-facing beaches. But it does seem, and I'm glad you pointed this out, that the northern Outer Banks, they might not have the evacuation orders, but they could have worse beach erosion than the other spots.
Yeah, the only reason there's probably not evacuations up there is it is a little higher elevation, and the roads are a little bit elevated more. So the big reason for the evacuations, I think that was a big breaker this weekend. News came out, people are like, oh, evacuations. But I really wasn't shocked, because if you've been to the Outer Banks, you know Highway 12 is probably going to be impassable. And so the first thing they did is get all the tourists off the islands, because you don't want tourists there. I've seen this happen with even in Cherry Grove and Oak Island. People park their cars, they get in their beach house, and they wake up in the morning and there's water submerging their car and they're stuck. So you don't want people to be trapped there. You mentioned, Tim, that a lot of the locals are going to ride this out. I'm not surprised. If you've talked to anybody who lives in Ocracoke or Hatteras as a resident, they're hardy people. They will probably, like you said, hunker down. They'll probably have 3 or 4 days worth of food, beverages, some adult beverages probably as well, stocked up, and they will end up just riding this out, and they've done it in the past. The thing is, you just don't want people, rescuers or first responders, that have to go in there.
Right, and this is not the same as other hurricanes, because they might not get a drop of water that falls from the sky. There might be 1 or 2 rain bands. You're not going to have the flooding in that way. You're going to have the ocean flooding as the big issue, like you said. And so hopefully everyone's staying safe. If you're inside, you should be safe, hopefully. The big concern is how many homes are going to fall into the water. I think a lot of them, hopefully, are not being inhabited now. We see those pictures every time. Those are usually uninhabited homes that fall in. But there's going to be some of that this week. And with that level of flow and this level of wave activity, the wave height, there could be some impact to piers. We see that with hurricanes every time. Some piers get damaged. That could happen this time too.
Yeah, so just so everybody knows the view you're looking at, this is a live view from Avon, and that's the Avon Pier. And I posted this earlier, and people said that the pier looks pretty shady to begin with, and it does look like it's gone through some things. But I'm look at those waves, Tim. Those are huge. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have surfers out there. Look at the sets just coming in. Now, the Outer Banks, this happens quite a bit, but those are pretty high even for Outer Banks standards.
They're enormous. Yeah, they're very, very. I mean, for East Coast standards, we live on the East Coast. We don't have the same level of expectation that they do out west. We don't see things like this all that often. I do have the Wrightsville Beach camera up to it. The surfers have been going nuts down there.
Wow.
I've got a cousin who's one of these crazy guys down there.
I see him out there wading
canceled
out there.
Yeah.
Oh, there goes
canceled all the lessons, and he's out there instead.
Yeah,
but they're doing their thing. It looks like people stayed out of the water, the regular swimmers, which is good, but the surfers are out there.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are just watching the surfers. As you mentioned, East Coast surfers, they are always dying for some bigger swells and some waves. So this is like their wheelhouse. Look at them all. I mean, there's a ton of them out there, Tim. Wow. They must be flocked. They
we can't
probably have been
condone it,
eyeing this. Look at that.
It is absolutely packed. I mean, you don't get swells like this that often in North Carolina. So if you're out there, you really need to know what you're doing. The surfers usually do, I guess. But again, we're going to tell you to stay out of the water. But we'll watch the pictures.
The one thing I will tell you, the one thing I'm always a little more cautious with, they have a flotation device with them, so they're a little bit better equipped to get back. If they get exhausted, as long as their tether doesn't break, their leash, they can grab the board and kind of rest. If you're a swimmer without a life preserver or a flotation device, that's the danger part about the rip currents. People think, even good swimmers drown, Tim, because they end up trying to fight it and they exhaust themselves. And that's usually what ends up taking lives. It's not the fact that they get swept out. It's that they panic and they start swimming and they get exhausted.
That's right. And even on this view right here, you can see how close the water already is to the dunes. That's not normal for Wrightsville. That's already up higher than it usually is. So they'll probably be okay down there. But there's going to be some expensive beach erosion that takes a lot of sand off of most of the North Carolina beaches, not even just the Outer Banks.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of these communities deal with. And I'm understanding that some of the federal funding for beach renourishment was cut this year. So I'm kind of curious to see if some of these towns will be able to replenish some of this erosion that happens. But I tell you what, that's a lot of surfers out there. I don't think I've seen that many surfers on that camera in a long time.
Yeah, it's busy. It's unusual. And like you said before, these days leading up to it, usually it's just a day or two. This is a long swell that's going to last the whole week.
Yeah. All right. So we'll probably talking more about this tomorrow in the coming week, but stay safe on the Outer Banks. That storm is heading your way in 24 hours. We got more impact news, though, coming up next.